The legal battle between NASCAR and Teams 2311, Racing and Front Row Motorsports has taken a significant turn against the sanctioning body. Judge Kenneth D. Bell's recent ruling undermines NASCAR's defense strategies, exposing critical flaws in their arguments and potentially setting a precedent for antitrust law in motorsports. Central to the dispute is NASCAR's refusal to approve FRM's acquisition of a charter from Stewart-Haas Racing, which was most recently associated with the number 10 car. Despite NASCAR's objections, Judge Bell ordered the immediate approval of the transaction, stating, Bell rebuked NASCAR's attempt to delay the ruling, emphasizing that the sanctioning body had ample opportunity to present its case. He further criticized their insistence that the approval could not be undone if an appeal succeeded, noting that NASCAR had previously signaled agreement to the transfer before FRM filed its lawsuit. One of the most damning elements of Bell's ruling revolves around NASCAR's release clause, which bars teams from suing the organization. Bell described the clause as anti-competitive and likely in violation of federal antitrust laws, writing, NASCAR's release to race requirement simply doesn't pass muster and is likely to be found to violate antitrust law. The judge also highlighted NASCAR's contradictory arguments regarding the release clause. On one hand, NASCAR claimed that 2311 and FRM couldn't sue because they didn't sign the 2025 charter agreement. On the other, NASCAR argued that teams signing the agreement would waive their right to file antitrust claims. Bell addressed this logical inconsistency, stating, plaintiffs or any other team that wanted to challenge NASCAR's conduct as an antitrust violation is put in a classic catch-22. The team must accept the 2025 charter agreement, including the release that bars plaintiffs' antitrust claims, but if it doesn't sign the charter agreement, then it can't bring those same antitrust claims because it doesn't hold a charter. NASCAR's defense heavily relied on claims that allowing 2311 and FRM to race under the 2025 agreement would cause irreparable harm. Bell dismantled this argument, pointing out NASCAR's own praise for the charter system. NASCAR has the same terms with 30 other cars and has repeatedly represented to the court that those terms reflect a fair and beneficial deal for all concerned. So the court's injunction requiring NASCAR to permit plaintiffs to race chartered cars cannot constitute irreparable harm to NASCAR. The judge also addressed NASCAR's concerns about sharing confidential information with the two teams, calling the argument meritless, since the teams would gain access to such information during discovery for the trial anyway. Judge Bell emphasized that the ruling serves the interests of the fans, ensuring competitive parity by allowing all top-tier teams and drivers to participate in the 2025 season. It is in the public interest of the consumer, which is the fans in this case, that all the best cars and best drivers are represented in every race next season as this case plays out, pending a resolution. With Bell's ruling, NASCAR faces an uphill battle. Their attempt to enforce the release clause has backfired, leaving the organization vulnerable to further legal scrutiny. Bell's clear rejection of their arguments on multiple fronts indicates that the court sees merit in the team's antitrust claims. As the trial approaches, scheduled for December 2025, NASCAR must not only prepare to defend against allegations of antitrust violations, but also contend with the immediate implications of Bell's injunction. The sanctioning body's legal footing appears increasingly precarious, and the ultimate outcome of this case could reshape the sport's governance structure. The ongoing antitrust lawsuit filed by 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports against NASCAR could have seismic implications for the sport if the teams prevail. The case, centered around NASCAR's charter system and its controversial release clause, barring teams from filing lawsuits, challenges the very foundations of NASCAR's governance model. A victory for the plaintiffs would likely lead to transformative changes in how NASCAR operates, significantly altering the dynamics of power and economics within the sport. At the heart of the lawsuit is the charter system, which grants teams guaranteed entry into NASCAR races and a share of revenue. If 2311 and FRM win, the system could face a complete overhaul. Judge Kenneth D. Bell has already suggested that the release to race clause, which prevents teams from filing lawsuits, is likely anti-competitive and in violation of federal antitrust laws. A ruling in favor of the teams could result in NASCAR being forced to remove this clause entirely. Teams might gain more autonomy in transferring charters without requiring NASCAR's approval. This would create a more open and competitive marketplace, empowering smaller teams to thrive and reducing NASCAR's centralized control over team operations. A victory for 2311 and FRM could embolden other teams to demand greater independence from NASCAR. Currently, NASCAR holds significant sway over team operations through the charter agreements and other regulatory mechanisms. A win for the plaintiffs might lead to freedom to negotiate sponsorships and partnerships. Teams could gain more freedom to negotiate lucrative deals without fearing interference or veto from NASCAR. Teams might feel encouraged to challenge other potentially restrictive NASCAR policies, such as revenue distribution or race schedules. A ruling in favor of the teams could force NASCAR to revisit its revenue-sharing model. Teams have long argued that the current distribution system disproportionately favors the sanctioning body and track owners. A favorable ruling might lead to greater revenue share for teams. Teams could secure a larger percentage of broadcasting and sponsorship revenue, making the sport more financially sustainable for smaller teams. If revenue distribution becomes more equitable, teams might rely less on external sponsorships to cover their operating costs. NASCAR has long operated as a centralized authority, dictating terms for teams, drivers, and sponsors. A legal defeat could weaken this authority. NASCAR might be forced to adopt a more collaborative approach involving teams in decision-making processes to avoid future legal disputes. The lawsuit highlights complaints about the lack of transparency in NASCAR's governance. A win for the plaintiffs could lead to reforms that make NASCAR's decision-making processes more open and accountable. The outcome of this case could set a legal precedent for other motorsport leagues worldwide. If 2311 and FRM prevail, it might inspire teams in other series to challenge restrictive practices by their governing bodies, potentially reshaping the global motorsport landscape. Judge Bell emphasized the public interest, stating that fans deserve to see the best cars and drivers competing. A ruling in favor of the teams could enhance competitive parity. By reducing barriers for smaller teams to compete effectively, fans could witness more diverse and competitive racing. Legal reforms might improve NASCAR's reputation, especially if the case addresses long-standing grievances about fairness and transparency. If 2311 Racing and FRM win the case, NASCAR's governance and business model could be fundamentally altered. While such changes may initially cause disruption, they could ultimately create a more equitable and competitive environment for teams, drivers, and fans. However, the trial is set for December 2025, and the road to resolution will undoubtedly be filled with further legal maneuvers. Whether the sport can emerge stronger or face prolonged instability depends on how NASCAR responds to this pivotal moment in its history. A victory for 2311. Racing and Front Row Motorsports in their antitrust lawsuit against NASCAR would mark a turning point for the sport, setting the stage for a new era of transparency, fairness, and competitive balance. Judge Kenneth D. Bell's rulings thus far have not only exposed critical flaws in NASCAR's arguments, but have also illuminated systemic issues within its governance structure. If the plaintiffs prevail, the potential removal of the controversial release clause and an overhaul of the charter system could empower teams to operate more freely, negotiate better sponsorship deals, and compete on a more level playing field. This would address long-standing grievances about the centralized power NASCAR wields over its participants and could lead to a redistribution of revenue that benefits smaller teams and fosters financial sustainability across the grid. Such a ruling could also extend its influence beyond NASCAR, establishing a precedent for antitrust law in motorsports and inspiring other teams across global racing series to challenge restrictive practices by their governing bodies. While the immediate implications might include operational disruptions and adjustments, the long-term benefits could lead to a revitalized sport where fan interests are prioritized and the competitive landscape is enriched. Fans would see the best cars and drivers competing without artificial barriers, enhancing the excitement and unpredictability of each race. However, the journey to this potential future is fraught with uncertainty. The trial, scheduled for December 2025, will determine whether these transformative changes take root or whether NASCAR can maintain its current structure. Regardless of the outcome, this case underscores the need for motorsport organizations to adapt and evolve in response to growing demands for equity and accountability. In the end, the resolution of this legal battle could redefine not just NASCAR, but the very nature of motorsport governance.